Can Joe Flacco keep the starting quarterback job? What's the trade market for some disappointing Jets draft picks? What are expectations for Jermaine Johnson? We'll discuss all of this and more on today's mailbag episode of the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, August 17th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you for making the show your first listen or your first watch every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening or watching, and you'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give the episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday we try and do a mailbag. Occasionally we have to move it to a different day, but we have our mailbag show today, thanks to everybody who submitted questions. And we begin with a question about Zach Wilson. It seems the injury to Zach took the focus off his play. Does his lack of short accuracy in the passing game alarm you? Looks like early last season all over again. Well, I think if we're being honest, when Zach Wilson was on the field Friday night against the Philadelphia Eagles, it was not very good. He airmailed one pass to Garrett Wilson. Of course, the interception was pretty ugly. It was not the type of throw you'd ever like to see a quarterback make. Am I concerned about his short passing? Well, I'm concerned from the standpoint that we saw him struggle in that area last year. And until he shows he's fixed it, I think it has to be a concern, at least on some level. Am I concerned because of how he played Friday night? I mean, maybe to a certain extent, I'm a little concerned, but I go back to something I say all the time about the preseason, especially your starters in the first game when they're only playing maybe 2-3 series at most. You really don't get a good feeling for how their performance is, because that's just like the first quarter. In a regular season game, you would never make your final judgment on a player's performance based on how they do in the first quarter. But that's all we have to go on in the preseason game. So we don't know how Zach Wilson would have finished the game. Maybe he just got off to a slow start. Maybe he would have had a big game if he had played all 4 quarters. So, yes, I have some degree of concern over Zach Wilson, but it's more about last year. And I don't think that there's anything that could have been done in that one game that would have changed my mind. We're just going to see what happens with Zach Wilson going forward. But if Zach Wilson goes out and hits every single pass, connects every single pass under 5 yards, it's not going to suddenly make me feel completely confident. It's something that will build over the course of the season. It's going to take like a half season's worth of games to show Zach Wilson showing that level of consistency on short passes before my concern goes away. Concern doesn't mean Zach Wilson's destined for failure. It just means it's an area to watch. Again, though, I would caution against reading too much into just a couple preseason series, because every single play is overanalyzed in the preseason because there aren't that many to go by. And I think there's also kind of the psychological impact that Friday night was the first game any of us has seen since January. So we've been waiting for football. And you see this in training camp when every single play and practice is dissected and overanalyzed in a way that would never happen during the regular season, during a practice then. So I think I always tend to caution against reading too much into preseason. I think if you're not sure whether you're putting too much emphasis or too little emphasis on a preseason moment, you're probably putting too much on it, because we've been waiting so long to get some sort of real football to break down, that very easy to go overboard. Our next question is from David. ESPN recently ranked the Jets 21st in terms of offensive line expectations and 3rd in talent under the age of 25. Both were before the Becton injury. Which of these was more surprising to you? So 21st in offensive line expectations, 3rd in talent under the age of 25. Which is more surprising? I think the offensive line is more surprising because on paper, and I think even with Dwayne Brown, who we don't know how much is left in the tank, but on paper, even with Dwayne Brown, I think this is a decent offensive line. I think it's probably better than the 21st best offensive line in the league. And we're talking young talent. Well, you have to remember that the Jets have 7 players who were top 40 picks in the last 2 years. That's a lot of young talent that they brought in. So just on that standpoint alone, you'd think that they would rank very high as far as young talent goes. And as David mentioned, this was before the Becton injury, so Becton would have been factored into that young talent under the age of 25. And this young talent is going to determine whether Joe Douglas remains the Jets general manager, whether we remember him as a successful general manager or not. This is a big year for Joe Douglas from the standpoint that now he's got these 7 young players on the roster. And beyond that, the Jets spent a lot of money last year in the offseason. They spent a lot in free agency. This is not a team with a lot of flexibility this coming offseason. There's not going to be a lot of cap space. The only way to create cap space would be to cut players, for the most part, who are expected to play big roles on this team this year. There are some starters who are on sign for next year, say like George Fant and Connor McGovern. That's 2 of your 5 offensive linemen. So to the extent the Jets have cap space, it's going to have to go toward either retaining them or replacing them. This team is like largely set for the next 2 years. So it's going to be the sink or swim moment for Joe Douglas. I've said it all throughout the offseason that this was the offseason that was going to make or break Joe Douglas. Jets need to be good this year. I mean, I don't know if they need to be playoff team. I don't know that they need to be, Super Bowl team, but they need to show substantial improvement this year because this is your team. Of course, there are going to be some moves that they can make. There are going to be a couple things they can maneuver. Of course, you have the draft every year, but this is largely the roster that's going to be the Jets roster in 2023 as well. So this better be good. And you've got the young core of talent. There's 2 parts of any rebuild. There's the planning, and then there's the execution. I think most people would say the planning's been pretty good. The Jets got all those draft picks. They've had this influx of young talent. They've been able to spend. They've hopefully upgraded a lot of positions on paper. The question is now the execution. Have the Jets done it? Have the Jets made the right choices? It's one thing to plan. It's one thing to give yourself all these resources. It's one thing to avoid the really stupid Jermaine Johnson free agent contracts. It's another to do the correct scouting. It's another to find the right players for your team. And we'll find out whether the Jets have. I think if you're a Jets fan, though, I think after the last 11 years, there's finally a potential light at the end of the tunnel, though. There is reason for optimism. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work, but there's finally some reason for hope because you've got all this young talent on this team. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to talk the quarterback position. We're going to talk Joe Flacco, and we're going to talk whether or not there's a way he could end up keeping the job. I'll tell you what I think as we continue on this Wednesday Mailbag Locked On Jets episode. Of course, the start of the NFL regular season is right around the corner. The Jets play Baltimore in a few weeks, and that means it's going to be the beginning of the fantasy football season. If you're into fantasy, you need a competitive edge to win. And that's where Elias Game Plan comes in. It's the only sports app from the most trusted name in sports stats, Elias Sports Bureau, the official statisticians of U.S. pro sports leagues, including the NFL. Their app lets you access team and player stats, head-to-head comparisons, and Elias insights from the Elias Sports Bureau's research team. This app is your one-stop source for player news and league-validated player stats and team records, expert game analysis for betting, building your fantasy team, and impressing friends. It's perfect for preseason. You get player previews to help you draft a winning fantasy team and team previews so you know what to expect as the regular season kicks off. Elias is the most respected research team in the industry. Quality information is key, so they created this app for accurate data and important context. Take my advice and download the Elias Game Plan app today. With new features available all the time, take your game to the next level. The NFL season is right around the corner, so don't wait. Find Elias Game Plan in the App Store or Play Store right now. Thank you again for making Locked On Jets your first listen every day. However you play, get the latest NFL fantasy draft tips from Locked On Fantasy Football and Locked On Dynasty. Plus, starting August 22nd, we're bringing you daily top 10 lists for Fantasy Draft Week. Locked On Fantasy Football and Locked On Dynasty, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And today on Locked On Jets, we are doing our weekly mailbag. Our next question is about Joe Flacco. Is there a level that Joe Flacco would have to play at to force a quarterback controversy, such as going undefeated while Wilson is out? I don't know that there's going to be a quarterback controversy this year. I think Zach Wilson's going to play most of the games. Here's how I see it. Now, if Zach Wilson's only out game one, I think he's going to be the game two starter no matter what. I don't think it matters what Joe Flacco does the opener against Baltimore. I think if Zach Wilson misses more than one game, then it's kind of it turns into a week-by-week scenario. So if Flacco goes out there and is not very good or is shaky or is just okay, Zach Wilson's going to be back in whenever he's healthy. But if Flacco starts the first two games and looks really good and the Jets go on a winning streak, then I think it becomes more of a week-to-week type of thing where you don't want to mess with the hot hand, in part because then if Zach Wilson goes in and struggles, then you do have a quarterback controversy, and everybody's going to talk about, oh, should Flacco be in there? So I think what will happen, this is kind of like what we went through last year with Mike White a little bit. Mike White played that great game against Cincinnati, played a good first quarter against the Colts, and Zach Wilson was not ready for the Buffalo game, as we now know, but if Zach Wilson was ready, I still think Mike White starts that game, and I think it would have been one of those things where the Jets would have kind of played up the Wilson's injury a little bit more than it really deserved. They would have said, well, we want to be super cautious, and really what they're doing is they're just waiting for the moment to put Zach Wilson back in. But you have to wait till the quarterback struggles. So if Flacco leads the Jets to a 2-0 record and is looking really good, I think he stays in the lineup until he loses a game. And then when he loses a game and he doesn't look good, that's when Zach Wilson goes back in. I think that's kind of the way the Jets will play it, because first of all, you want to try and win games, and if Flacco's got the hot hand, I think you want to ride that. But beyond that, once Flacco falls back to earth, you kind of know that it's nobody's going to question when Zach Wilson goes back in. So, and again, like the Jets can play up Wilson and say, well, we want to make sure Zach Wilson's really important to us. We want to make sure he's 100%. He's not 100% yet. He's only 95%. I think it'll be one of those things if Flacco gets off to a good start. And I think at some point, though, Zach Wilson's going to be back in, whether it's week 2, week 3, week 4. At some point, Zach Wilson's inevitably going to take the starting job. Our next question: can Flacco pull off a renaissance late in his career, similar to what Vinny did for the Jets at ages 35 to 40? Well, here's the thing about Vinny. If you look through his Jets career, he was here a long time, but 98 was really the only good year he had. He obviously got injured 99 the first week of the season, a very traumatic moment for any Jets fan. 2000, he was not good. 01, he was shaky. He was not a good match for Paul Hackett's West Coast offense. 02, he got benched. So that was pretty much the end of him being a starter. 03, he was the backup quarterback. He started, I think, the first 6 games. Pennington got hurt in the preseason. Came back in 05 after Pennington and Jay Fiedler got hurt and really wasn't that great. So Vinny really only had one great year for the Jets. That was 98. Everything else was somewhere between mediocre and shaky. Can Flacco do it? Anything's possible. I mean, I've seen things that I never thought were doable in the NFL in the past. But I think we need to be realistic about where Flacco is. The last time a team made the playoffs with Joe Flacco as the starting quarterback was 2014. The last time Joe Flacco started more than one game in a season and averaged more than 7 yards per attempt, also 2014. It's been 8 years since Joe Flacco was a quality quarterback, and we've seen his deterioration. We saw it in Baltimore. We saw it that year he was starting in Denver. Can Joe Flacco get you through a couple of games? I think so, but if Joe Flacco hasn't been able to do it in 8 years, is old age going to make it more likely or less likely that he's going to be able to do it? Again, is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. I mean, anything's possible, but if we're looking at the odds right here, I think there's a reason Joe Flacco has no interest in starting, has no starting interest in this league. There's no team out there that have said we got to get Joe Flacco to even compete for a starting job this year, and I think there's a reason for that. He's clearly on the downside of his career. He could have one good game, again, especially motivated opening day against Baltimore. Could he have a throwback game? Absolutely. But look, he's a limited quarterback. He has no mobility at this point of his career. And he essentially, so that means that if he's under pressure, he's just going to have to dump it off to the outlet receiver. He's not going to be able to extend plays. There's just a certain ceiling on what Joe Flacco can do right now. There's nothing that really jumps off the page about his game. So I think it's going to be tough for Flacco to have a renaissance. Fortunately, the Jets, I think, on paper, are going to be able to run the ball, which is the type of thing that'll be able to support him. It'll keep him out of those bad downs and distances where teams can go crazy blitzing on him. And listen, Flacco's a professional. He's going to know how to set the protection. He's going to make sure you're in the you're in the right play. I mean, there are certain things Flacco does bring to the table, but I don't think we're looking at a guy who's going to be able to hold up over the course of 17 games. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we will close out this weekly mailbag. We'll talk trade value for some disappointing young players. We'll talk expectations for a rookie. That's as we continue on this Wednesday mailbag Locked On Jets. Of course, the beginning of the new season means you have a chance to make some money, and BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. You can find all of your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, including the NBA, the NHL, even combat sports, even esports, even golf, and yes, the National Football League, which returns in a couple of weeks for its regular season debut. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. Jets-Ravens, Week 1. Do you think the Jets are going to win? If you think Joe Flacco can lead the Jets to victory, lay some money down. BetOnline, where the game starts. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday mailbag show. Our next question, what do you think the trade value is for Denzel Mims and Jabari Zuniga? I don't think there's room on the roster for either of them. This is a nice problem to have. Is there a team out there we could do a swap for these players with? Well, I think Zuniga, the answer is a clear no, because the Jets waived him last year and nobody claimed him off waivers. Nobody wanted him on their 53-man roster. When a player gets cut, before they go to the practice squad, every other team has a chance to claim them and take this player on. It's not a younger player actually has to go through what's known as the waiver process. So that means the 31 other teams all have a chance to say, I want this guy. And if they do, they get him. The player doesn't have any say over it. So all 31 teams passed on Zuniga last year. So I would have to ask, what has changed this year that would make him more desirable? I don't see that happening. As far as Mims goes, I would be surprised. I think it's more likely Mims could find a trade partner with some desperate team at receiver. Maybe there's some team that really loved him in the draft a couple of years ago. I would tend to think not, though, because what's Denzel Mims really shown you these first couple of years? He had a couple decent games in 2020, and that's about it. Last year, plus camp this year, plus the first preseason game, looks like a guy who can't catch the football, looks like a guy who can't get lined up correctly. And maybe there's some team out there that's just willing to throw a late round conditional pick. Maybe you could do like a player for player kind of swap where some team has a similar disappointing player and they think maybe they can get something out of Mims. I think Mims is possible, but I wouldn't count on it. And I just feel like as Jets fans right now, we want Mims to be good. We want to believe Mims has talent, but the results to date just haven't really justified a receiver who has any value. Again, I think it's more, I don't think anybody's going to give up anything for Zuniga because they could have got him for free last year. And even though he's having a good camp this year, does that really make a difference? Does that one sack in the Bengals game? He was a practice squatter last year. So I don't think there's much of a chance for Zuniga. I mean, granted, like the Jets have traded guys like Jordan Willis and Blake Cashman the last couple of years. So I guess anything's possible in theory. And it only takes one team to have a weird valuation on the player. But why would that team not have had a weird valuation on that player a year ago? I don't see it happening. And even Mims, I think Jets fans view Mims as more valuable than the league does. Because if you look at Mims' performance to date, there's not really much that distinguishes him from a receiver at the bottom of any team's depth chart. He's big, maybe he's fast, but that's not what makes a good receiver in this league. There are lots of guys who are big and fast in this league. Mims pieces have not come together. Maybe they can. Listen, if they can, they will. I'm sure that near the end of training camp, every player who could conceivably have value, teams are putting them on the block, seeing if they could get anything. But if these guys get cut, it's a sign nobody wanted them, and I feel like that's probably the direction this thing is heading in. Our next question: what are reasonable expectations for Jermaine Johnson this season? To me, if he's not the number 2 edge rusher behind Carl Lawson by the end of the season, I would view his rookie year as a failure. I don't know that I'd go that far. I think he's got to look like a decent player. I think his expectations are lower than the other 3 guys who went in the top 40, though. Breece Hall is going to be a starting running back. Sauce Gardner is going to be the starter at corner. I think Garrett Wilson's going to be a starter at receiver. Jermaine Johnson goes into a spot where there's kind of a log jam. There's a lot of players who are pretty solid. And Robert Saleh, I think, is going to want to rotate defensive linemen in and out. I think Johnson's going to play more situationally this year. I don't think he's going to be a guy who's going to see the field as a full-time guy because part because the Jets have a lot of talent there. And you have to remember, John Franklin Myers is going to see his fair share of time on the edge at defensive end. Lawson's obviously going to be there a lot. They gave Jacob Martin a fairly lucrative contract in free agency. So there's lots of guys to battle playing time with. For somebody like a Jermaine Johnson, my expectations are a little bit different, and they're probably a little bit lower. Look, he's got to look like he belongs because he was an older draft pick, and when somebody's an older draft pick, they usually have to contribute right away because they don't have as much runway. There's not as much time for them to develop into a quality player. They're already kind of closer to the athletic peak than than somebody who's a year or two younger. So Jermaine Johnson has to look like he belongs. I don't know how to put that into statistical terms because I don't know exactly how much he's going to play. You'd like to register a couple sacks. You'd like to hold up well in the run game when he's in there. But I don't think he has to be an impact player this year. I think he just like somebody who's a solid rotational player, somebody who looks like he's getting better every week. And for me, that's enough this year. I don't think he needs to be the number 2 edge rusher. Now, my view would be different if the Jets had less at the defensive end spot, but I think the Jets have a decent amount of talent there, so I can't put expectations that high on Jermaine Johnson. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button. You'll never miss an episode, and you'll get notifications as new episodes are posted. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the channel. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.